James May has said that another motoring series with Jeremy Clarkson and Richard Hammond is unlikely to happen. The trio had huge success on the Top Gear, then the Grand Tour, with the final episode of the Amazon show set to arrive in September. Asked by Amal Rajan for the Today podcast whether he had any plans for another series or episode, May said, "We're not going to make another series together about cars." He added that you should never say never, but that it was pretty unlikely. Reflecting on his legacy, May said the trio had been working together for longer than we thought. "We have to accept we've done it for nearly 22 years. When I started doing it in 2003, I thought this was a bit of a laugh and maybe it would last a few years." May, Clarkson and Hammond started presenting BBC's Top Gear in 2003 and in 2015 launched the Grand Tour on Amazon. "I recorded today the last piece of voiceover ever for the Grand Tour," May told the podcast audience. He added that it was remarkable it lasted so long and he was grateful and thankful that it happened. "I don't want to be the person in the pub who used to be on the telly," he joked. He told the audience his greatest ambition now was to get to the end of my life without running over anybody. "I've managed it so far and it would be deeply ironic and unpopular if it happened now." NASA has confirmed audio shared widely on social media of astronauts in distress was a simulation broadcast on its YouTube channel in error. In the clip intended to be used for training purposes, a voice said an astronaut on the International Space Station (ISS) had a tenuous chance of survival. The broadcast of the clip on Wednesday evening sparked speculation online about a possible emergency in space, but NASA said all members of the ISS are safe. This audio was inadvertently misrouted from an ongoing simulation where crew members and ground teams train for various scenarios in space and is not related to a real emergency, it said on the ISS X page. Private firm SpaceX also posted on social media to say there was no emergency aboard the ISS. The accident, which occurred at 11:28 British Standard Time, led some people to believe that a real astronaut was suffering from decompression sickness in space. It was made all the more believable because, unlike fake audio, which usually appears first from spurious sources, this was broadcast on an official NASA channel. In the audio being shared on social media, a person asked the ISS crew to help get an astronaut into his spacesuit to check his pulse and to provide him with oxygen. Though NASA confirmed that the audio was shared in error, it did not independently verify the recordings being shared online were the same that it broadcast. Decompression sickness, also known as the bends, is a problem typically associated with scuba diving, which bubbles form inside the body due to a change in external pressure. Astronauts follow protocols to remove nitrogen from the body to prevent this from happening in space. According to NASA, its crew members aboard the ISS were asleep at the time the audio was broadcast, in preparation of a spacewalk at 1 p.m. British Standard Time on Thursday. It says this will still go ahead as originally planned. The UK's biggest retailer, Tesco, has said that confidence is beginning to return to shoppers after it reported strong sales growth. The supermarket reported an increase in UK sales of nearly 5% in the past 3 months, saying shoppers were putting more in their baskets and switching to Tesco from competitors. It saw strong sales in its premium food range, claiming consumers are opting to dine in more. Tesco Chief Executive Ken Murphy has come under fire for his £10 million pay package last year, but the company defended the figure at its annual general meeting. Tesco chairman Jerry Murphy said he had no difficulty in defending Ken's absolute level of pay. "We do recruit from time to time at very senior levels from the global market, and frankly we just have to be competitive with that market." Before the AGM, Ken Murphy had told reporters, "I absolutely accept that I'm well paid." According to the pressure group Share Action, the Tesco CEO's salary is 430 times more than the average Tesco employee. Tesco said there had been a gentle improvement in consumer sentiment, and it was hoping for a boost from the summer of sport with the Euro 2024 football tournament about to begin. The retailer is planning for strong demand on match days and has observed an uptick in consumer confidence and positivity going into summer. Sales of its premium finest food range have been particularly strong, Tesco said, rising by 12.5%. "We've continued to build momentum in the business with strong volume growth across the UK, Republic of Ireland and Central Europe, supported by easing inflation," Ken Murphy said. "Our market share reflects this, growing more than any other time in the past 2 years, with customers switching to us from other retailers, shopping with us more often and with more in their baskets." Every major English water company has reported data suggesting they've discharged raw sewage when the weather is dry, a practice which is potentially illegal. They analysed spills data from 9 firms, which suggests sewage may have been discharged nearly 6,000 times when it had not been raining in 2022, including the country's record heat wave. Water companies can release untreated sewage into rivers and seas when it rains to prevent it flooding homes, but such spills are illegal when it's dry. The firms say they understand public concerns around dry spilling, but they disagree with the findings. They've said the spill data shared with the Environment Agency was preliminary and unverified, and also disagree with how they defined a dry spill, which they say differs from the Environment Agency's approach. The latest findings follow an investigation conducted last year, which found 388 instances of possible dry spilling in 2022 by 3 water companies, Thames, Wessex and Southern, after they shared their data. The other 6, Anglian Water, Northumbrian Water, Severn Trent, South West Water, United Utilities and Yorkshire Water, had refused to share data about what they might be spilling. They said it could prejudice an ongoing criminal investigation by the Environment Agency, EA, and Ofwat into their activities. The regulator, the Environment Agency, which had the data disagreed and in January handed it to the BBC. Helen Wakeham, head of water at the EA, said the whole point of monitoring was to increase transparency, and they wanted to make the data more publicly available. Overflow points where sewage is discharged have monitors which record when spills start and stop. They cross-reference the company's spill data from these overflow points with local Met Office rainfall data. Over 18 months, they analysed data from nearly 10,000 monitors, which had recorded more than 1.5 million hours of discharges. The analysis suggests dry spills may have started on more than 200 days in 2022, lasting more than 29,000 hours, including during the record summer heatwave, when people were cooling off in England's rivers and seas. We are most concerned about those spill events happening in places where people are likely to go into the river, said Professor Barbara Evans, Chair in Public Health Engineering at the University of Leeds. Consumption of water contaminated with human or animal feces exposes people to parasites and bacteria such as Cryptosporidium and E. coli, which cause diarrhea and vomiting, or viruses like hepatitis A, which can lead to liver infection. The 6 water companies who were subject to the latest investigation took issue with the analysis, citing the data they used and the methodology. Every year, England's water companies are required to submit an annual report to the EA summarising their discharges. This enables the EA to investigate potential cases of dry spills and to decide whether it will take any action. They have been analysing data behind the 2022 report, but in responding to their findings, the water companies argue that the datasets are unverified and contain errors. Examples of potential dry spills in the data were presented to each water company. Anglian Water disagreed with all the examples presented, and the remaining 5 companies disagreed with some. The main reason the companies gave for disputing the examples was that their monitors malfunctioned and incorrectly recorded spills. From 2025, all water companies have committed to publishing near real-time sewage maps for the public to increase transparency. They will use the data from these monitors to create the maps. David Henderson, CEO of the industry body Water UK, said, "We are the most transparent industry in the world when it comes to water. No other country in the world publishes this sort of data." In May, Anglian Water was found guilty of failing to provide data to the Environment Agency for the investigation, and it will be sentenced in July. Regarding the methodology, some of the water companies argue it did not take into account that some outlets have large catchment areas and it can take a few days for any rainfall to drain through their systems, i.e. sewage detected on a dry day may be the remnants from an earlier rainy day. However, they accounted for drain down time by only considering a discharge a potential dry spill when there had been 4 consecutive days in the surrounding area without rain. Helen Wakeham from the EA says the methodology is in fact more generous to the companies than the EA's. Commenting on the results of the investigation in general, she said, "I'm not surprised these networks haven't been invested in for decades. That investment needs to take place." In May, the UK's top engineers and medical professionals warned in a public report the risk from human fecal matter in our rivers will increase without changes to the network and how we build our cities. Dr. David Butler, Professor of Water Engineering at the University of Exeter and co-author of the report, said investment from water companies has not really been up to scratch, but he added that we must also rethink how we design our towns and cities. What we'd like to see is reversing urban creep that is well beyond the powers of a water company. You see it all the time, people concreting over their front garden. If you could unpick that, it would help because that would reduce stormwater runoff and that would give us more capacity in our pipes. Reducing dry spilling would also help prevent excessive nutrients entering rivers from sewage discharging. The issue, which is also associated with agriculture, can cause excessive amounts of algae to grow, resulting in waterways becoming depleted of oxygen, killing off other animals like fish. It can also have health effects because this can produce other toxic products which might be harmful to human health, said Professor Evans of the University of Leeds. South West Water said, "We are clear that storm overflows must only be used when absolutely necessary to protect people's homes and regard all unpermitted dry spills as unacceptable." Yorkshire Water and Northumbrian Water said they do not believe the findings are true reflections of dry discharge numbers. United Utilities said the information you have received from the Environment Agency reflects unvalidated raw signals and not validated start-stop times. Anglian declined to provide a formal comment, but in correspondence has said that the monitor data was not enough to determine dry spills due to monitor malfunctions and said the methodology was flawed. The 3 companies investigated also responded to their new findings. A Thames Water spokesperson said there are a number of methodologies for defining and calculating why and how dry day spills occur. We regard all discharges of untreated sewage as unacceptable, and we have planned investment in our sewage treatment works to reduce the need for untreated discharges. A West Wessex spokesperson said naturally occurring groundwater can enter sewers, often from private pipes and in dry weather, which can cause overflows to operate for days or even months. We agree overflows are outdated, so we're investing £3 million a month to help reduce how often they automatically operate. A spokesperson for Southern Water said, in areas with high levels of residual groundwater, spills can happen outside of periods of rainfall. Without these releases made up almost entirely of groundwater, homes and communities would be flooded. Combating these groundwater spills is a key part of our £1.5 billion Clean Rivers and Seas plan, which is designed to drastically reduce all storm overflows across our region by 2030. Water and sewage companies are responsible for what's known as combined sewer overflows, CSOs, which release sewage from treatment works or the sewage network into the UK's waterways. The majority of CSOs record when they discharge. For this analysis, they took the stop times of individual discharges from these CSOs and converted them into the standard 12 to 24-hour counting blocks used by the EA to detect spills. In the specific case of United Utilities, they found that some of the discharge data provided to the EA did not correspond to their 2022 annual report summarising this data. For that reason, this was discounted from more than one-third of United's overflows. The start times of the company's spills were matched to daily rainfall data from the Met Office, which is produced from a network of automatic rainfall gauges and observation stations. This rainfall data is presented in gridded squares that cover the land area of the UK. Each grid cell is 1 kilometre. Each overflow point is part of a large network or catchment area, and rain further away can take time to reach the overflow point. They considered the 9 grid squares nearest to each spill site in the analysis. Individual catchment areas may be larger or smaller. The EA defines a dry day as one during which there was less than 0.25 millilitres of rain and less than 0.25 millimetres of rain the previous day. But they took a conservative approach of 4 consecutive days without rain in all 9 grid squares to allow for drain downtime. The methodology was independently reviewed by 3 academic experts working in this field. Housing and rental prices are key issues for voters at the general election, and one that several have got in contact about. Bristol, for example, is the most expensive place to rent outside of London, and the problem is leading to more people having to find alternative accommodation. Sharon Cove is among the many people who've said about their situation. "I just feel so sorry for the young people that don't have it as good as I did," she says. Like most parents, Sharon wants the best for her son. At 31, Dan has had to move back in with mum and dad. He runs a small business, a record shop in Bristol, selling successfully to music lovers. He can afford the rent on the shop, but not the rent on the flat as well. The price of private rentals is huge, Sharon complains. She says it makes it impossible for young people to move on, adding the issue is them not being able to save and get on the housing ladder the massive deposits they need to save up. His son is far from alone. Recent official statistics found that 40% of people aged 16 to 34 are now living with their parents. 6.7 million people in all. Bristol is the most expensive place to rent in the UK outside of London, according to recent figures from the Office for National Statistics. The average rent in the city rose 9% to £1,734 a month in February 2024. The housing crisis has become her number one issue in this election, not for her generation, but her son's. I think they were sold a lie. I think they were sold, go to school, work hard, go to uni, get a good job, and life will be good for you, she says. And it just isn't, not for them right now. Sean Douglas is battling the same problem 40 miles away at the motorway. The 39-year-old rents a flat in Cheltenham, where he says prices have spiralled out of control. He was one of dozens of people who were contacted. They asked people about topic matters most in their election, and many of them said housing was not getting enough attention. Mr. Douglas has a good job but can only afford a small one-bedroom flat. Landlords, he says, are asking for eye-watering rents for even studio apartments. For him, there is a clear political solution: rental reform. The last government tabled legislation to regulate the rental market, including outlawing so-called no-fault evictions, but the bill died when the election was called. Several parties are now promising similar policies in their manifestos, but whoever wins, Mr. Douglas says it just needs to get done. The inertia is frustrating, they just need to get on with it. Housing, or the lack of it, is not invisible in this election. All the political parties address it in their manifestos, but it is some way down the list. Former social worker Pete Lydon thinks housing should be in the top 3, saying it is a key issue. I think it's up there with National Health Service, with the cost of living, he adds. For decades, Mr. Linden worked as a social worker, often helping people struggling with homelessness. I've seen it firsthand. I've seen people in housing that's unfit for human habitation, water running down the walls. In Bristol, where he is now retired, there are 800 people living in vans, many without basic facilities. The city ranks 3rd in the UK for people living rough on the streets. At the last count, 80 people were counted on the street, and that's the ones they could find. He accepts that housing is a huge, complex problem. Mortgages are linked to interest rates and the economic markets. Council-owned housing relies on the finances of local councils, currently in dire straits, but the 74-year-old recalls the country has managed to build in tough times before. He says, after World War II as a country, we were extremely hard up, and yet governments of both colours did manage to build housing for ordinary people. It is possible if it's seen as a serious enough issue. Both Conservatives and Labour are pledging to build 1.5 million new homes over the next Parliament, equating to 300,000 a year. That is at least 100,000 more than has been achieved in recent years. The Liberal Democrats want whole new garden cities built. The Green Party add to that ambition, insisting that they will build 150,000 new social homes owned by councils or housing associations. But not everyone is a fan of new housing estates. On the eastern fringe of Bristol, residents have been fighting plans by the local council to build 4,000 new homes on greenfields. Martin Roberts is angry at his local plan. Bristol is a big, successful economic hub, he says. I can understand why people want to come and live here, but is that a good reason for building on our greenbelt? I don't think it is. The retired accountant now lives in a small, quiet hamlet just a mile from the East Bristol Ring Road. He accepts that something must be done. Housing has got massive problems in this country, with people struggling to buy. Prices are constantly going up, rents are constantly going up. But like many in his rural area, he worries that it cannot take a sudden influx of people. We have no infrastructure. The northern fringe has the M4, the M5, Bristol Parkway station, he adds. We have nothing, a couple of A roads and a ring road that is mostly a car park. If you add thousands and thousands of extra homes on our doorstep, everything is going to grind to a halt. The policies and pledges by the various politicians and governments include, from the Conservatives, they would build 300,000 homes a year, prioritising brownfield development. They would permanently waive stamp duty tax for first-time buyers, properties costing up to £425,000. This threshold was raised temporarily and is due to revert to £300,000 in March 2025. They've also proposed a new Help to Buy scheme. Labour would reform planning rules, fast-forward development on brownfield and what it calls grey belt land such as car parks. The party has pledged 1.5 million new homes over 5 years. It wants to extend an existing scheme which helps people get a mortgage with a small deposit and is backing more rights for renters. The Liberal Democrats want additional social housing and new garden cities. They support local authorities that want to end the right to buy policy for council housing, ban no-fault evictions, make 3-year tenancies the default, and create a national register of licensed landlords. The Green Party would invest in new social housing, pledging to build 150,000 affordable social homes. They would ban no-fault evictions and introduce rent controls. They would set higher environmental standards for new builds and would require more affordable units. And reform would fast-track planning, offer tax incentives for development on brownfield sites, and give tax breaks to small-scale landlords. People born in the UK would be given priority for social housing. The moods of the two main parties' general election campaigns do not tell us what will happen on the 4th of July. But as we pass the halfway stage in a long slog to polling day, they do give us a strong flavour of how candidates, strategists and officials think this election is going for them. And right now, the moods of the Conservatives and Labour campaigns could not be more different. Even the most fatalistic Labourites, for so long determined to avoid complacency, are beginning to admit that they believe government is within their grasp. Even the most loyal Sunakites, convinced for so long that during an election campaign voters would see the qualities that they see in their Prime Minister, are beginning to concede that the long-predicted narrowing of the gap between the two parties simply isn't happening, at least not yet. Utterly dire was the stark response from one prominent Conservative to the campaign so far. There's no clear messaging or strategy. They decried the Kool-Aiders working for Rishi Sunak, who they said were not realistic about his strengths and weaknesses, before thrusting him to the centre of what has so far been a presidential-style campaign. Some Conservative candidates argue that the election result will be closer than many expect, but privately few even half-heartedly mount an argument that the overall outcome is up for grabs anymore. One candidate said that the prevailing pessimism in the party had sparked a vicious cycle. People just stop campaigning, they said. A lot of colleagues haven't really worked their seats before. When morale is down, you can't really do anything. Another influential Conservative made a similar argument. At the grassroots level, they said it's quite a low motivation, low energy campaign. Volunteers are down. Lots of Tory MPs who think they're going to lose their seats aren't really bothering. And that makes it quite difficult inside the campaign to know what's really going on. Some Conservatives insist, though, the true picture of national support is nowhere near as dire as some models projecting a near wipeout would suggest. The Labour vote is softer than people think, one source said. In parts of England, the solid Labour vote, people who say they're definitely voting Labour, is no different to 2019. What is different is there's many more undecideds who were Conservatives. The problem is how do you get those people to come out when apathy is pretty high? The new message piloted by Grant Shapps, the Defence Secretary, warning of the consequences of a vast Labour majority, may have been a targeted way of finding ways to give those persistent undecideds a reason to vote Conservative. It was arguably the biggest moment of this third week of the campaign, and a strategy from a campaign that feels like it has run out of better ideas. Nigel Farage's decision to become a leader of Reform UK and run for a seat himself was one of the biggest moments of the campaign so far. The Conservative Party's worst nightmare came true. On Thursday evening, minutes before ITV's latest election debate started, a YouGov poll appeared, putting a Reform UK 1 percentage point ahead of the Conservatives for the first time. Not surprisingly, Mr Farage seized on this with glee, telling the ITV audience, "We are now the opposition to Labour. This is the inflection point. The only wasted vote now is a Conservative vote. It is only one poll and 1% is within the margin of error. Let's see what others suggest in the coming days, but psychologically it is the last thing the Conservatives need." In Labour, meanwhile, there is a tangible buoyancy. Campaign insiders say that the first 3 weeks have gone smoothly, but insist that this is not the product of springing into action after Mr Sunak's sudden decision to go to the polls. Things are going well because of how carefully crafted things have been for a long time. That's a step change in standards, in professionalism. It's a cultural change that Keir has brought. Everything is done properly. The Labour campaign has not been without its wobbles. The saga over whether Diane Abbott would be a Labour candidate disrupted the party's new grid. and there was frustration at the top of the party at Sir Keir Starmer's failure to immediately rebut Mr Sunak's tax attack in the first televised debate last week. In some ways that was good for us because it reminded people that not everything will go to plan. To some on the left of the Labour Party, as signified by a protester early on in Sir Keir's speech at the manifesto launch, the absence of radical new policies in the manifesto risked depressing turnout the left-wingers. Sir Keir embraced that critique in his speech, saying the stability in his programme was evidence of the stability he would bring to government. That's why Labour chose to launch their manifesto at the same venue in Manchester, where Sir Keir unveiled his 5 missions for government in February 2023, with messaging substantially the same as today's. So what is next for the Labour campaign? The party is proud of its so-called ground war, the pavement pounding, door knocking and leafleting that goes away from the cameras. Privately, the party reckons its operation and data gathering is far superior to the Conservatives. As for the air war, what you'll see in media coverage, it'll be the same kinds of events and certainly the same message. But Sir Keir's visits will be taking place over the coming days in constituencies with larger Conservative majorities than those who he has visited so far. Activists too are being encouraged to focus their energies on more and more ambitious target seats. One curious twist coming in the next few weeks, not lost on senior Labour people, is the start of the Euros, the football tournament. This will command attention and passion, disrupt television schedules, and distract people at just the point the election campaign reaches its crescendo. How to campaign in an inevitably partisan manner, as people, particularly in England and Scotland, come together to watch the football, poses a challenge. Some at the top of the Labour Party are beginning to think, if a little furtively, of the aftermath of the 4th of July too. Senior staff still do not know for sure what jobs they would have in Downing Street if Labour win, but Sue Gray, Sir Keir's Chief of Staff, has spent most of the campaign at party headquarters preparing detailed plans for government. Some shadow ministers have taken time off the campaign trail to hold access talks with civil servants in Whitehall. There are logistical questions about a Labour government too. For example, would they let MPs take their traditional 6-week summer recess? While plans are not yet developed on this, the answer appears to be a resounding no. We can't pass up the opportunity to hit the ground running, one Labour source said. The topic of male mental health has received much more prominence in the last decade, something many would argue is long overdue. But while the high rates of male suicide have put the topic firmly on the national agenda, huge numbers of men still find it difficult to be openly vulnerable and discuss their feelings. With suicide the biggest killer of men under 50 in the UK, a new film explores why many men still bottle up their emotions and asks whether such ingrained systematic behaviour can be changed. Duncan Cowles, who directs Silent Men, is the first to admit his own struggles to open up emotionally to those closest to him, joking that tackling the subject for the documentary was like dragging myself backwards through a hedge. But he says at the Sheffield Documentary Festival he felt it was an important journey to go on because the risks of ignoring your emotions are far scarier. I think there's still a lot of societal pressure around those traditional masculine traits, Cowles says, being strong and things associated with being a leader on this stable, reliable, dependable figure. There's maybe something still seductive about the idea of that old-fashioned man, that James Bond character that a lot of us maybe grew up with. I think it's still quite sought after by a lot of people. Whereas my experience is when you're a bit more open and vulnerable, that can actually lead to strong relationships, and therefore more joy, connection and fulfillment, and yet still we're drawn to being closed off. The idea of men suffering in silence is nothing new. It was 1854 when Henry David Thoreau wrote "Most men lead lives of quiet desperation." The fact that the essayists' most famous observation has survived 170 years and is still quoted so widely today is a testament to its relatability, but also of how little progress has been made. Thoreau tapped into a feeling many men have both then and now of being unfulfilled, whether that's in their career, relationships, or for reasons they can't quite put their finger on. Overwhelmed by the commitments of mundanity of day-to-day life, while simultaneously unwilling or unable to voice their emotions, men often find it hard to cope. I suppose it's always been something I've struggled with, opening up and showing emotions around family, Cowles says of his reasons for making the film. While I was at university, I'd done a film which investigated that, but it always felt like this thing that I hadn't fully resolved in my life. Setting out to explore the subject further at the start of the film, Cowles posts an advert online looking for men to speak to for the documentary. He then goes to interview some of those who reply. He travels around the country and speaks to men from different walks of life over several years. At one point, he attends a retreat where men gather for a weekend to do group therapy. I wanted to go on my own journey parallel to speaking to men as part of the film, but it turned into a more personal film than I expected. The Scottish filmmaker interviews members of his own family and studies how their personalities shaped his own. My dad likes drilling holes in the wall and his stamps, but he's not big on verbal communication, Cowles notes early on, painting a picture of fathers many will recognise. One trauma specialist interviewed for the film cites a study which found that babies in blue blankets, and therefore assumed to be boys, were touched for significantly less time than girls. So that's really interesting. What are we doing in our culture about socialising boys to not be touched as much, not be seen as vulnerable, not need emotional support as much as girls? The toughening up, be a brave boy, big boys don't cry, that process of making you into a man, where someone has told you that's what a man is, that's a man that has to be emotionally strong. There are all these social constructs that kind of trap you, which is causing huge numbers of mental health issues for guys. We've got a big problem on our hands. Silent Men is Cowles' first feature documentary, but he previously won a BAFTA Scotland Award for his short film Isabella. After it was difficult to get the men featured in the film to talk about their feelings, Cowles replies strangely not, because there's something about speaking to a stranger that can sometimes feel a lot easier than speaking to someone who's in your own family. I guess it's because you've got less to lose. The insights from other men make for interesting viewing. One contributor, Ainsley, says his outlook changed after having a baby, but not necessarily in the way you might think. He says the responsibility of being a father actually meant there was less time and opportunity to find room for expressing his own emotions. Another man tells his young son constantly how much he loves him, and says he hated the thought of anybody close to him dying without knowing how much they meant to him. One of the film's most affecting and funniest moments comes when the microphone Cowles' brother is using cuts off after the battery dies, and he uses that exact moment when he can't fully be heard to tell Duncan, "I love you." Despite all of the heavy talk, the film is peppered with moments of levity. The director occasionally cuts away abruptly from tough conversations to run footage of soothing shorelines and bumblebees on flowers. One thing I really wanted to do with this film is make it feel accessible, not all mental health based, but to also contain humour and leave people with a smile on their face. The documentary builds towards a conclusion as Cowles sits down with his parents to tell them he loves them. While both are receptive, his father is somewhat dismissive of the airy-fairy nature of showing emotions, suggesting it's not a normal thing for a man. Therefore, his father argues if somebody isn't opening up, that's actually a good sign, as not feeling the need to be vulnerable means they are generally feeling content. Reflecting on his father's comments now, Cowles said he comes from a generation where he doesn't want to see someone visibly upset, so if you're showing nothing, then that's a good thing to him, because it means you're okay. I know what he means. Younger people seem to have a different opinion on these kinds of things, and they're more willing to open up, he notes. There's that awareness of the issue. Cowles admits on camera his worry that he'll pretend to have made progress for the purposes of giving the film a happy ending, when in reality there may not have been any significant change. But several months after filming wrapped, Cowles says making the film definitely has altered his behaviour. I wouldn't say it's a Hollywood transformation, he laughs. It's been quite a gradual thing, and I wouldn't say I'm perfectly by any means. But compared to what I was like before, my partner is very appreciative that I've changed, that I'm more conscious of it and able to recognise when I should open up a bit more. The former paratrooper known as Soldier F has appeared in a court for the first time since being charged with murders on Bloody Sunday in Londonderry in 1972. His lawyers are mounting a challenge to have the case against him dismissed ahead of his trial. Until today, he had not attended any hearings in person since being charged in 2019. Soldier F is accused of 2 murders and 5 attempted murders. Relatives of those killed on Bloody Sunday and their supporters were in court for his attendance. 13 people were shot dead when the Army's Parachute Regiment opened fire on a civil rights march in Londonderry. A large floor-to-ceiling curtain screened a corner of the courtroom from public view. Soldier F is accused of murdering William McKinney and James Ray when soldiers opened fire on civil rights demonstrators on the 30th of January 1972. His lawyer told a hearing in Belfast there was an insufficiency of evidence to put him on trial. At the start of proceedings, the judge ruled that an order granting the veteran anonymity should remain in place. The hearing is continuing. At a previous hearing in Derry in December, to decide whether the case would proceed, a judge said the evidence was strong enough to send the soldier for trial at the Crown Court in Belfast. Who is Soldier F? A former British soldier who served with the Army's Parachute Regiment in Northern Ireland during the Troubles. He cannot be named due to an interim court ordering granting his anonymity. Soldier F is being prosecuted for the murders of William McKinney and James Ray on Bloody Sunday. He also faces charges of attempting to murder Patrick O'Donnell, Joseph Friel, Joe Mahon, Michael Quinn, and an unknown person on the same date. The decision on whether to prosecute Soldier F involved several legal challenges and U-turns. Having weighed up 125,000 pages of material, prosecutors said in March 2019 that they would send Soldier to trial for the murders of Mr. Ray and Mr. McKinney, as well as several attempted murders. However, in 2021, prosecutors dropped the case after the collapse of the trial of two other Army veterans who were accused of another Troubles-era killing. At the time, the families of the Bloody Sunday victims said the decision was a damning indictment of the British justice system. Their legal challenge against the decision was successful. The court then rejected an attempt by the Public Prosecution Service, PPS, to have its own appeal referred to the Supreme Court. Prosecutors subsequently announced that they had decided to resume the prosecution in September 2022. He was returned for trial in December 2023, but no trial date has been given. Informal concerns raised about Russell Brand while he hosted Big Brother's spin-off programs were not properly escalated or adequately addressed, according to the findings of an investigation. The comedian and actor fronted shows including Big Brother's Big Mouth and Big Brother's Celebrity Hijack on Channel 4 between 2004 and 2008. An investigation by production company Banijay UK has said managers were alerted to allegations that he asked staff to get audience members' phone numbers and that his behaviour made female crew members feel uncomfortable or intimidated. However, no formal complaints were made and the concerns were not escalated. Banijay said, "We are extremely sorry to anyone who was impacted by this behaviour and felt unable to speak up or that their voice was not properly heard." Last September, Brand was accused of rape, assault and emotional abuse in an investigation by Channel 4's dispatches programme, The Times and Sunday Times. He strongly denied the allegations, saying his relationships have always been consensual. The Sunday Times report quoted a former TV researcher as saying Brand's pursuit of audience members for sex was reported to production managers, but the concerns were dismissed. According to the paper, the researcher said that they were told by a talent manager, "It's what happens with the talent. Boys will be boys. It's not a big deal." Banijay, which brought Big Brother producer Endemol Shine in 2020, is one of several broadcasting organisations to have investigated whether any complaints were made about Brand's behaviour during his employment. Banijay asked law firm Lewis Silkin LLP to conduct the investigation. Lewis Silkin's head of investigations, Karen Baxter, concluded no formal complaints were made about Brand during the programmes. There were, however, concerns regarding Brand's behaviour, which were raised informally with senior members of staff, particularly in relation to him asking runners to obtain phone numbers of audience members and female crew members, feeling uncomfortable or intimidated by his behaviour while working in Bristol in 2004 and 2005. These concerns were not properly escalated or adequately addressed. The Banijay investigation said Brand was understood to have had sexual relationships with some audience and staff members, and these were understood to be consensual. Producers knew he was a recovering drug addict with a reputation of being edgy, but no particular safeguards were put in place to protect Brand, those who worked with him, or those who otherwise came into contact with him, including the audience. UK Chief Executive Patrick Holland said industry protocols, duty of care and expectations of behaviour have vastly improved in recent years and continue to be reviewed and progressively updated on a regular basis. A Channel 4 spokesman said, "We thank Banijay for their thorough investigation and have noted their findings." In March, Channel 4 Chief Executive Alex Mahone apologised for a former employee after the channel's own internal probe found that it had not investigated a serious complaint made against Brand in 2009. US banking giant Wells Fargo has sacked a number of employees following claims that staff were faking keyboard activity to fool the company into thinking they were working when they were not. It is not yet clear how the issue was discovered or whether it was specifically related to people working from home. The US bank said staff had been fired or resigned after review of allegations involving simulation of keyboard activity, creating impression of active work. New rules recently came into effect in the US, which mean that brokers working from home must be inspected every 3 years. A spokeswoman for the firm said Wells Fargo holds employees to the highest standards and does not tolerate unethical behavior. In 2022, Wells Fargo said it had adopted a hybrid flexible working model, with staff permitted to work from home some of the time. Some large companies have been using increasingly sophisticated tools to monitor employees since remote work expanded during the COVID pandemic. Such services can track keystrokes and eye movements, take screenshots, and log which websites are visited. But technology has also evolved to evade surveillance, including so-called mouse jigglers, which are aimed at making computers appear to be in active use, which are widely available. According to Amazon, where they can be found for less than $10, have been sold in the last month. Bloomberg, which first reported the move based on a filing Wells Fargo made to the US Financial Industry Regulatory Authority, said that more than a dozen people have been affected. There have been confirmed 6 instances in which staff have been discharged after review, and 1 case in which a person resigned voluntarily after being confronted with the claims. Many of them had worked with Wells Fargo for less than 5 years. Many firms, especially in the financial industry, are pushing staff to return to the office. Remote work has remained popular since the pandemic, but numbers have been drifting lower. In the US, just under 27% of paid days last month were work-from-home days, compared with more than 6% of the pandemic in 2020, according to research by professors at the Instituto Tecnológico Autónomo de Mexico, IT Business School, Stanford, and University of Chicago. As of the spring, about 13% of full-time employees in the US were fully remote, and another 26% enjoyed a hybrid arrangement, according to the researchers. Jaguar Land Rover says it plans to invest more than £1 million to help police fight vehicle crime in the UK. The money will be used to support police operations in the theft hotspots, as well as to fund intelligence gathering. Earlier this year, the company's boss angrily denied reports that Range Rovers were particularly vulnerable to theft. However, owners have complained that insurers have been hiking their premiums dramatically or even refusing cover. Among them is Merrill Cabellis, a 41-year-old Frenchman who has lived in the UK for 7 years and works in the technology industry. Last year, the cost of insuring his 2017 Range Rover Sport doubled from £2,000 to £4,000. He then discovered that his insurer would not be able to renew his cover at all this year and struggled to find a replacement. Faced with a best quote of £10,000 and with the car itself losing value rapidly, he decided to cut his losses and sell it. We've been Range Rover customers for many years, and it really feels as though we've been priced out now. We're just really disappointed. We love the car, but because of the insurance, the experience of owning it went downhill so quick. Insurance costs can vary considerably, with factors such as the driver's record and experience, as well as where the car is kept and the security features it contains, all taken into account. Expensive luxury cars are often targeted by thieves because they can be sold abroad at a big profit. That in turn can push up premiums. For Jaguar Land Rover, this has become a problem. The company builds a range of premium models, with the Range Rover brand a particular favourite for celebrities, politicians, and even royalty. That kind of prestige comes at a cost. The Range Rover starts at £104,000, while its smaller sibling, the Range Rover Sport, is on sale for £75,000. But embarrassingly for the company, it also has a reputation for being vulnerable to theft. Earlier this year, JLR's chief executive Adrian Mardell condemned reports that suggested that the Range Rover was Britain's most stolen vehicle. He admitted that vehicle theft by organised criminals was a serious issue in the UK, but insisted his own business had been unfairly singled out, and that strenuous efforts had been made to improve vehicle security. He accused the insurance industry of failing to take account of all the available information when setting premiums. The police funding is the latest in a series of moves designed to reassure consumers and attempt to bring down insurance costs. Last year, for example, the company set up its own insurance products in an effort to help customers who were unable to obtain cover, though some Range Rover owners claim they still have been unable to obtain quotes. The new money, JLR says, will be used to support several police forces with additional dedicated resources to respond to vehicle thefts across the country. It will also help pay for a new national policing unit to gather intelligence on vehicle thefts and increased police activity at the ports used by criminal gangs to ship cars abroad. The company says it is already sharing information with police, to help them find and recover vehicles, and has provided training to some 650 officers. At the same time, it says it has been working hard to make its vehicles less vulnerable to theft. It cites data from the Police National Computer showing that since January 2022, only 0.2% of new Range Rovers and Range Rover Sports have been stolen. The Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors is a leading professional body working in the public interest to advance knowledge, uphold standards, and inspire current and future professionals. Their members help to create and protect built and natural environments that are sustainable, resilient, and inclusive for all. At RICS, their staff work inclusively with their members, collaborating to support them in their practice and build connections. They set qualifications and independently regulate chartered professionals and firms, building trust and confidence with clients and consumers. With a heritage of over 150 years, RICS sets the standards for over 130,000 members and candidates operating in the development and management of land, real estate, construction, and infrastructure across more than 140 countries globally. Their trusted data and insight guides decision makers and governments, helping to shape public policy, deliver positive societal change, and provide a foundation for confident markets. Their members influence the quality of lives, underpin societies, and drive economies. Everything that they do supports their current and future memberships to uphold, advance, and inspire professionalism for the benefit of society. Michael Mosley has been remembered as one of the most important broadcasters of recent decades in a special tribute program following his death. The final edition of his radio show Just One Thing, recorded live at the Hay Festival on the 25th of May, aired on BBC Radio 4 on Friday and is available. The recording was introduced by fellow TV doctor and presenter Chris Van Tulleken, who praised the impact Mosley made and said he would miss him as a friend, mentor, and most of all, as a broadcaster. There will also be a special TV programme titled Michael Mosley, the Doctor Who Changed Britain, on BBC One at 8 p.m. on Friday. Mosley's body was found in a rocky area on the Greek island of Symi on Sunday, 4 days after he went missing while on holiday. Paying tribute in the introduction to the posthumous broadcast, Van Tulleken said Michael's genius was to make himself the patient in a way that's utterly relatable. Van Tulleken, who worked with Mosley on the BBC's Trust Me, I'm a Doctor series, referred to his colleague deliberately infecting himself with a tapeworm and having a camera inserted to examine his bowel. In the special edition of Just One Thing, Mosley was in conversation with Paul Bloom, Professor Emeritus of Psychology and Cognitive Science at Yale University. Discussing tips for leading a better life, Mosley said it was a challenge to have a cold shower, despite the fact I know I'll feel better afterwards. He told the audience at Hay that it's always followed by a lot of screaming, and he got through it by singing loudly, which my wife really hates. Mosley also spoke about meditation and mindfulness, and admitted that even though he told other people to do it, the reality is I don't really do it. I mean to do it, and I have long conversations with my wife about it, but somehow we never get round to it. Later in the episode, Mosley shared with the audience one of the scary experiments he had taken part in, a personality test. I was stuck in a brain scanner and showed images of someone being hit with a ruler, and then they hit me with a ruler, he explained. When he asked for the results, the psychologist said, "I'd send your wife out of the room at this point." Mosley admitted that according to this test, I'm a bit of a psychopath. As the audience laughed, Professor Bloom reassured Mosley, "If you're worried you're a psychopath, you're not a psychopath." The TV special will focus on how the 67-year-old broadcaster and columnist transformed people's lives through science. Mosley, who studied medicine in London and qualified as a doctor, was also known for his programmes like The Truth About Exercise and Lose a Stone in 21 Days, and for appearances on BBC One's The One Show and ITV's This Morning. He also wrote a column for the Daily Mail and was an advocate for intermittent fasting diets, including through the 5-2 diet and the Fast 800 diet. The father of four was reported missing after he set off for a walk from Agios Nikolaos Beach, near where he was staying on the northeast side of Symi, at around 1:30 p.m. local time or 11:30 a.m. British Standard Time on Wednesday. Despite an extensive search by the Greek authorities, his body was not found near Agia Marina Beach until Sunday by local journalists, staff and the mayor. An initial post-mortem examination concluded on Monday that he died of natural causes. Separate toxicology and histology reports have been ordered, but results have not yet been released. House buyers are putting off purchasing a new home until the Bank of England cuts interest rates, evidence suggests. UK house builder Crest Nicholson was forced to issue a profit warning after it said sales momentum had softened since Easter due to volatile mortgage rates, as well as buyers now expecting borrowing costs to drop later this year. Meanwhile, a survey of chartered surveyors found that demand for homes had weakened in May. Financial markets are forecasting that the Bank of England could cut interest rates in August or September. Crest Nicholson reported a pre-tax loss of £30.9 million for the 6 months to the end of April, including the impact of exceptional costs, compared to a £28.4 million profit over the same period last year. The house builder said that while the spring selling season started well, it added momentum has softened slightly since Easter, reflecting the volatility in mortgage rates and the expectation of a base rate reduction coming later in the year than previously expected. It added that the imminent general election is creating some short-term uncertainty, but this is anticipated to be alleviated in July once the outcome is known. The firm now expects adjusted full-year profits of between £22 million to £29 million. Analysts have expected the company to announce profits of around £38 million. Crest Nicholson's share price tumbled by nearly 12% to 212.4p. A survey by the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors, RICS, found that demand had weakened in May. Terence Parsons, senior economist at RICS, said a recent recovery in the housing market appears to have slipped into reverse of late, which he blamed on higher mortgage rates in the past couple of months. However, he predicted that this was delaying rather than derailing a modest improvement going forward. Indeed, respondents continue to envisage a more positive trend in sales activity coming through over the next year, although this is likely predicated on the Bank of England being able to start lowering interest rates in the coming months. Those surveyed by RICS said that demand was weakest in both southeast and southwest England. In contrast, prices were still robust in Scotland and Northern Ireland. NHS England's medical director says he is alarmed by reports that people are using weight loss drugs as a quick fix to lose a few pounds and get beach body ready this summer. Professor Stephen Powers said the side effects of the drugs could be dangerous and they needed to be used under medical supervision. Interest in Wegovy for treating obesity surged after studies suggested users could lose over 10% of their body weight. Drug treatments are now seen as an important tool in tackling obesity. Wegovy, a weight loss injection, can be prescribed on the NHS in England to people at the top end of the obesity range through specialist weight management clinics. It contains the drug semaglutide, which makes people feel full and reduces their appetite. Another anti-obesity drug called Mounjaro could be recommended for NHS use soon. Semaglutide is also contained in the type 2 diabetes treatment Ozempic. It has not been approved for helping people who are obese to lose weight, yet there is huge demand for the medication, creating a shortage for diabetes patients. Many online pharmacies are selling semaglutide injections for between £100 and £200, but they make a few checks on the weight or underlying health of the person buying them. A recent investigation found an online black market in sales of semaglutide without prescription, which doctors said could put people's health at risk. The investigation also found the drug being offered in beauty salons in London and Manchester. In a speech at the NHS Confederation Conference on Thursday, Professor Stephen Powers, NHS England's National Medical Director, said the drugs had clinical benefits, but he was alarmed to hear reports of them being inappropriately used. These are powerful medications that have side effects and complications and can, in certain circumstances, be dangerous, so they need to be used under medical supervision. They are absolutely not quick fixes for those who are otherwise healthy, who just want to lose a few pounds. Professor Powers also said, "We know these new drugs will be a powerful part of our arsenal dealing with obesity, but they should not be abused. Drugs including Ozempic and Wegovy should only be used by people prescribed them for obesity or diabetes. I'm worried about reports that people are misusing them. They are not intended as a quick fix for people trying to get beach body ready. Their medications can cause side effects such as nausea, bloating and vomiting, but for some people there can be a more dangerous complication." Dr. Vicky Price, an acute physician and president-elect of the Society for Acute Medicine, said these included serious life-threatening complications, including inflammation of the pancreas gland and alterations in blood salt levels. She and her colleagues are concerned about the growing numbers of patients they're seeing with complications from taking weight loss drugs they've bought online. The Royal College of GPs said it was highly concerned that patients were using semaglutide under the brand name Ozempic. For purposes the drug is not licensed for and without clinical supervision. It can be a genuine threat to patient safety and potentially contributes to supply shortages for those who could really benefit from them, said Chair Professor Camilla Hawthorne. We would encourage patients to take caution when accessing medicine online and only use outlets that follow GMC, General Medical Council remote prescribing guidelines, and have been approved by the CQC, the Care Quality Commission. Professor Hawthorne said it was never recommended to use prescription medication without a prescription. In many cases, people might not actually be getting what they think they are, which is really dangerous. Food manufacturers are recalling a small number of products believed to be pre-packed sandwiches containing salad leaves as a precaution following a recent outbreak of E. coli in the UK. Experts had previously said the outbreak was linked to food that was widely and readily available. Retailers are taking swift action to remove products from shelves. Some 113 people are known to be affected so far. Andrew Opie at the British Retail Consortium said following investigations by the Food Standards Agency and UK Health Security Agency regulators, a number of manufacturers in the supply chain are taking precautionary measures and issuing a recall notice for a small number of products. Retailers affected are taking swift action to remove these products from sale and are working closely with the Food Standards Agency to take any further action needed to minimise risk to their customers. We are expecting an update from officials shortly. What is E. coli? E. coli are a diverse group of bacteria that normally live in human and animal intestines. Some types are harmless, but others can make people seriously ill. Tests have shown that the type in this outbreak is called E. coli stech 0145. It produces a Shiga toxin, which can attack the lining of the gut. Symptoms can include diarrhea that can be blood, stomach cramps, fever, and vomiting. It usually takes a few days from being infected for symptoms to show. Most people recover well, but some, such as young children or people with underlying health conditions, can become very unwell. There is no specific treatment for E. coli infection. People who are infected can usually be cared for at home, and most will get better without medical treatment. It is important to drink plenty of fluids, as diarrhea can lead to dehydration. A small number may go on to develop serious complications, including hemorrhagic uremic syndrome, HUS, which can damage the kidneys. People should seek medical help if worried. There are things people can do to reduce the risk of infection. Regularly wash your hands with warm water and soap. Alcohol gels do not kill bugs that cause diarrheal illness. Wash fruit and vegetables and cook food properly. If you have symptoms, you should not prepare food for others and avoid visiting people in hospitals or care homes. People should not return to work, school or nursery until 48 hours after symptoms have stopped. Texts from the phone of a Conservative Senate member, which appear to ask an employee to maximise the politician's expense claims, have been seen by BBC Wales. Laura Jones is under investigation by police over allegations concerning her expenses. One message asked a staff member, "When doing a petrol thing, always make more than I did. Add in stuff, please, okay." The context for the WhatsApp messages is not evident. A solicitor on her behalf has said Ms. Jones is satisfied that any allegations in relation to impropriety surrounding expenses are entirely misconceived. The Welsh Conservatives in the Senate said, "We will not be commenting while this matter is being considered by the relevant authorities." Ms. Jones, who is Conservative Shadow Culture Minister, has previously said she will fully cooperate with any investigations. BBC Wales has seen messages sent to a member of staff who had asked whether they should make expenses claims for politicians for days when Ms. Jones was off sick. There was no direct answer to that question. However, a graph of proposed expenses then appeared to be sent to the phone of Ms. Jones. The response from Ms. Jones' phone said, "If you could always do more than it says, that would be fab, thanks." It was followed by a thumbs up emoji. Another message from the same phone said, "When doing a petrol thing, always make more than I did. Add in stuff, please, okay." It was followed by a thumbs up and a folded hands emoji. When the staff member asks, like visits to constituency office, a response says, "Yes, stuff like that," folded hands emoji. Mileage claims for Senate members must be approved by the member themselves. This cannot verify whether the messages represent the whole conversations between the people involved, nor their full context. But Miss Jones is currently being investigated by the Standards Commissioner Douglas Bain and South Wales Police. The police investigation is ongoing and no arrests have been made currently. The Standards Commissioner, who is responsible for investigating complaints against MS has referred a complaint on to police, according to the force. The original complaint to Mr. Bain was in relation to Miss Jones' handling of allegations of bullying by a senior member of staff. Claims about the South Wales East MS expenses emerged as part of Mr. Bain's investigation. It is understood the Standards Commissioner's investigation is on hold while the police inquiry is taking place, and police have spoken to at least one member of Conservative staff. A lawyer on behalf of Miss Jones said in a statement, Miss Jones did not receive any formal bullying complaint in relation to any of her staff members. They added that she is satisfied that any allegations in relation to impropriety surrounding expenses are entirely misconceived. Miss Jones' belief is that these complaints, being lodged with the Standards Commissioner, are without foundation. As these matters are the subject of ongoing inquiries, it would be inappropriate for Miss Jones to make any further comment. Miss Jones has no issue with the BBC or its sources putting these allegations to the police and or the Standards Commissioner, which will provide the opportunity to respond in a formal matter as part of the inquiry should the authorities require it.